It's always sad when a good thing comes to an end. It's always such a sad time. And it's even sadder when you know when precisely it's going to end. But, you know what they also say? Good things come to those who wait. And we waited a many moons to see the Stranger Things finale, and I think it was absolutely worth it. I've had a couple of conversations at this point about the Stranger Things finale, you know, like what people liked, what they didn't, what they would change, what they wouldn't change, and I have a whole bunch of thoughts from those conversations, and brand new thoughts that I'm sure will emerge in this video that I would like to share with all of you. What better way to ring in the new year than a nice, improv, completely unscripted video? I'm sure this will go fine. And of course, once you're done watching and you've heard all of my thoughts, and maybe you've had some new thoughts of your own just by watching, please feel free to share them in the comments. I of course ask you to be civil and, you know, don't call any opinion wrong or just explode at people for having a different opinion. Let's all be civil, let's all have a nice conversation about it. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is the visuals. I know for a fact that the budget for Stranger Things 5 went like way up from prior seasons. I don't know the exact number, but I'll put it on screen for you right now. Yeesh, I imagine it's a pretty big number. It's like some Hollywood level, like big budget movie like Avengers, maybe not Avengers Endgame, but very high budget stuff. And as such, and as expected, the sheer scale of some of the visuals went also way up there. And one of the biggest like visual effects oriented shots, and also I think one of the biggest and most controversial visual effects shots, was at the very end of episode 4. That's one thing almost everyone who I've talked to this about has pointed out, is that in that particular shot, it looked as though, you know, the soldiers were firing upon each other, and in how in a real military scenario, that would never happen. Other than that, the Demogorgons, you know, generally looked pretty good. Some of the lighting looked like a tiny bit delayed in some areas, like when they were like moving from a super low light level to a super high light level. And especially with his redesign, my goodness. Doing things like having little like gaps through his neck or his shoulders or really any part of his body that's a hard thing to pull off. I mean, with CG it's a little bit easier, but combining it with, you know, live action footage of the actor who plays Vecna himself, I forget his name for the life of me, I cannot remember it, but I think it's very ironic that he plays this super over the top, crazy evil psychotic villain, and yet the actor who plays him is like a total sweetheart. And I think another one of the like best visual moments when it came to the effects was during the, what was it? Was it episode 3 when the Demogorgon came to kidnap Holly? When it comes to small contained settings like that, you can pull off some real good effects if you got a nice focused vision and a nice focused team. But of course with big action sequences, like at the military compound when Vecna comes out in episode 4, of course there's gonna be a little bit of, you know, some flaws here and there. Just a little bit off. The Humvee flip was not perfect, but again, it's fine. You know, those things are very easily forgivable. I also think that the green screening for the Abyss, like when they went to the Abyss, the other world, I also think that was quite well done. Like all the characters like pretty well looked like they were actually there. There was only like 1 or 2 scenes where I could like really like sort of tell like that. I mean, of course it's obviously green screen, but there were only like 1 or 2 shots in the Abyss, and then like another like 2 throughout the rest of the season where I was like, yeah, that's green screen. But that's just bound to happen. I mean, hell, what the hell am I doing right now? Who am I to criticize ever so slight mistakes with a green screen? But by far my absolute, well, I don't know if I'd call it my absolute favorite, but one of my favorites. And, you know, not another dimension as that we had thought for 4 whole seasons. And the zoomed out shot of it showing one end, the other end, the upside down between. That shot was just, I loved it. I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. I think that's why I enjoyed Loki season 2 so much, because they were hanging out around the loom all the time, and just seeing something in just this vast, unbelievably huge cosmic area where it's like you cannot even comprehend how big it is. Absolutely love that kind of stuff. I think this would be a good time to address the elephant or spider in the room. And you know what? Speaking of spiders in the room, I have a side tangent. Every single day, every day for the past like 3 weeks, I come here, I sit down at the desk to do some stuff or play some games or watch some videos or do some undisclosed activities, and around the webcam and around my lights, which is up there, there have been spider webs, but like on the sides, like around here, like it kind of looks like I'm petting your head, but around here on the sides of the webcam and off the light going to the webcam, they've just been appearing there every single day. And I've been searching like a goddamn patrol dog to try and find this motherfucker, but I cannot find him. He shows up every day, puts webs on my webcam and to the light and around the light, and I swear to God, he's just doing it to annoy me at this point. I don't know, but if you know how much I hate spiders, you know how much I despise them. So when I find this motherfucker, I will let you know. Anyway, side tangent over, talking about the actual spider in the room, the Mind Flayer. In season 4, we were led to believe that Vecna was always the bad guy. And yeah, I mean, technically he was always the bad guy. But season 2 led us to believe that, wait a second, there's an even bigger baddie than the Demogorgon. There's the freaking Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer was a game-changing villain for the series. Game-changing. And we were made to believe that he was, in fact, the big final boss. But in season 4, it made us think, oh, Vecna was the mastermind, you know, he was the one behind all of this. But then it was like, no, in season 5, the Mind Flayer was behind all of this, but Vecna sort of just became one with it. But that is besides the point. I'm here to talk about the visuals of the Mind Flayer. I will say, I did not expect it to be a physical being, like that weird, you know, when it was in like that weird claw state where Vecna was hanging out, using it as his lair. I thought that was something he created, because there's just this still perfect fortress to contain everything. I thought the heart was something that, like, you know, the beating heart and the roof, I thought that was just something Vecna had made to just amplify his powers, or maybe that was the source of the hive mind and Vecna had just fully connected to it and was now fully integrated with it, like even more so than he was before. And I mean, the fortress itself always looked cool, but I was not expecting it to actually end up being a giant monster. The like shadow particle version of the Mind Flayer that we saw in season 2 and season 4 technically, I guess, that one was always like, you know, like relatively simple design, 4 limbs, the big head, the big spine tail thing, but very clearly spider-like. And then when the real, genuine final boss material. And I like the design. I absolutely digged the design of the real, actual Mind Flayer. It looks, acts, and screeches like a genuine spider, predator, queen type bitch. Also, I love the way its mouth opens, just showing that it's a constant, like, recurrence in design when it comes to all the, well, I guess the Abyss monsters. They're not really from the Upside Down. The Abyss, how all their faces just open up, and that's their mouths. Like, I like that they kept with that theme. It's not the most, you know, it's a giant CGI monster. It's nothing super impressive or something that hasn't been done before, but it hasn't been done before in Stranger Things, unless you, I guess, count the shadow versions of the Mind Flayer. But either way, I enjoyed the design of it. You know, I thought it was cool. I mean, who isn't a sucker for a giant monster fight? I mean, I'm sure we've all watched the Godzilla movies at this point. Be it the new ones, or the older ones, or the classic ones, or -1, we all love a big giant monster fight. One thing I did like that's a bit more of a visual storytelling thing was Henry's house in his mind prison thing. It was interesting because in season 4, he operated out of the version of his house that was in the Upside Down, which was all, you know, run down, broken, infested with vines and stuff like that, and just generally evil looking. Looks like Dracula's mansion or something. But over in season 5, in his mind prison, it's all fixed up. It's nice, it's pretty, it looks like how it looked when his actual family bought the real house. But all of it is built on a complete and total lie. It's this perfect fantasy world created by an actual psychopath monster. It was an excellent display of just how far Henry was willing to go and needed to go to manipulate the children into doing what he wants and submitting to him, basically. Whilst over in reality, they were inside the Mind Flayer in very uncomfortable, very disgusting positions. Tubes in their mouth, strapped up against the wall, kind of unconscious, hard to tell, because, they make like grunts and noises as if they can feel what's happening. It's just really messed up. And all the POV shots of the Demogorgons and the monsters and Vecna even, all those POV shots we generally saw from, Will's perspective when he was jacked into the hive mind, and just seeing the monsters just run around at these incredible speeds, those were an absolute joy to watch. Absolute joy. Were they perfect? No. But they were good, and I love me some high action point of view shots from the monsters, because we've seen point of view shots from heroes. We see that all the time. Getting it from the monsters' perspective, you don't see that too often. I mean, it happens, but you don't see it too often. So those were a whole bunch of fun to watch, especially when Will realized his sorcerer powers and we saw the Demogorgons who were all attacking his friends just levitating above them, and seeing the reactions of Will's friends, like Lucas and Mike and all them, seeing their reactions through the Demogorgons. That was cool. That was a neat little bit of usage of visual storytelling and just visuals in general. And I'd say overall that the positives of the visuals far outweigh the negatives. Sure, they're not perfect, but nothing's perfect. And even when you have an inflated budget, sometimes having an inflated budget in and of itself can cause more imperfections and more flaws to happen, because suddenly you have all these resources and all these options, and you get, confident in your ability, especially after doing something for so long. And that can lead to mistakes or imperfections that you didn't make in the past when you were more limited. I think that might have been the case for like a couple small shots, but generally, I think the visuals are pretty good in season 5. They were pretty good. That's enough visual talk. Let's talk about some characters, I guess? Yeah, let's talk about some characters. First off, we gotta start off with my boys, my homies for life, Steve and Dustin. Dustin, throughout the entire show, was standing on his business and standing on his feet and standing on his principles, especially when he was getting pushed around and harassed for keeping the memory of Hellfire and Eddie alive. And, he wasn't gonna allow himself to be pushed around like that and have Eddie's name just be utterly tarnished and just condemned. Like, he wasn't gonna stand for that, and he was in every single right to do so. If my friend died in my arms and then everybody had this warped, terrible memory of him and were like, defiling his grave with like, go to hell messages and stuff like that, I would not stand for that crap. And quite frankly, I'm surprised like Mike and the other Hellfire members seemed to be just letting it happen. Like, that was really surprising. Like, sure, Lucas, I can see like maybe like me being the sort of one that wasn't like, he was the least close with Eddie out of all of them. So I can understand Lucas maybe not being as upset, still being upset, but not really that upset. But I'm surprised Mike was as okay with it as he was. I guess his concern for Dustin sort of overrided his need to preserve Eddie's memory, since this is gonna sound cold, but since Dustin is still around. But it was still surprising to not see the other Hellfire members sort of be as defensive as Dustin was being. I guess in their minds, with all the crawls and the search to find Vecna, it just wasn't at the top of their priority list. But Dustin, man, he was totally in the right, and he was just in every right to do what he was doing. No questions asked. And I think Steve, good old Steve Harrington, such a great arc in just almost every season. He's had such a great arc. I think he was way too harsh, and I think he was way too aggressive towards Dustin. I think that was very like out of line for his modern day character. Cause sure, some part of him is always going to be a little bit of a dickhead, because that's just the kind of character he was written as. But after going through so much with all the other characters and going through so much story and so much development, especially season 4, my goodness, it just does not make sense in my mind from a writing perspective for him to be so unbelievably aggressive and just like condemning Dustin's actions and being like, bro, what the fuck are you doing? It would be way more in line with his season 4 character to be supportive of Dustin and, maybe being a little tough lovey in the sense of like, Dustin, you are completely in the right to try and preserve Eddie's memory and like clean up his gravestone and stuff like that. Like, that's all totally fine. But don't put yourself in harm's way while you do it, because, we kind of need you, buddy. I feel like that's the attitude Steve should have, or at least it feels like that's the attitude he would have, because that's the kind of character he felt like at the end of season 4. And then all of a sudden in season 5, he just becomes super aggressive and angry at Dustin, and I really don't think that's how that should have played out. Besides, Steve already has tensions with Jonathan in the present day, so I think it'd be better if him and Dustin didn't have those tensions and kind of just were friends, like they're supposed to be. Of course, they obviously make up in the end, and the scene where they actually make up and, Dustin hugs Steve and is like, I cannot lose another friend. Do not do this to me. That was a real tearjerker. And I guess in a sense, it felt like they kind of just wanted to have that scene with Dustin and Steve, but to kind of get to that point, they'd have to create a little bit of tension between them. So it kind of felt like they were more so, in a way anyway, trying to work from the end back to the beginning of how they got there. And that usually doesn't work too well. Still, after that point, Dustin and Steve, my two favorite characters in the show, absolutely love them. As for the other members of the original party, Max and Lucas were big highlights for me, quite frankly. Not just when they were together after Max woke up from her coma, but when Max was still in her coma and they were operating separately. Max figuring out how to navigate Vecna's mind prison and figuring out how to move between memories and finding that cave. I mean, that was pure luck, but then deciding to use it as a safe zone really displays her intelligence, because Max is a very intelligent character, and I feel like her being able to find her way and stay safe in such a dangerous place was a great display of that intelligence. Not losing any of her traditional and trademark sass, of course. While Lucas, on the other hand, never gave up on Max. He was always there for her, always going to see her in the hospital, and even, when the Demodogs came after her in the real world, he continued to protect her, picked her up, carried her, held on to her in the absolute darkest, scariest moment. And that is just very in line. I very much like how Lucas turned out as a character, a protective person who absolutely never gives up on his friends, no matter what. Not to mention, dude was ready to die to protect those kids in the tunnels. I mean, he took one, he kind of took one on the neck for them, and the lower chest, I guess. I'm sure he was scared, but he was absolutely ready to die to protect those children, and that was fantastic. Mike was also just really, really good, really good. All around, I really liked Mike. I think he shines a lot more in the finale specifically, and like the final 3 episodes, I really feel like that's where he shines the brightest. But my absolute favorite aspect of Mike as a character throughout the entire show is that his optimism and his general always having the best hopes for the future and sort of never giving up at trying to get to that point and reach that ending where everyone is okay. I love that that is like, a sense and trait of his that was never lost throughout the entire show. And then when that trait and that viewpoint and that outlook on life was finally challenged, he had other people there who had been through what he's going through to support him and give him advice. That scene at the memorial with him and Hopper was absolutely perfect. And speaking of perfect scenes from that point of the finale, my God, Dustin's valedictorian graduation speech. Could not have wrote it any better myself, even if I tried. And of course, the main man of the hour, who really feels like one of, if not the main character of the season, aside from well, there really is no one main character in this show, but I'm just so glad Will was in such a spotlight this season. Far more take-chargey, far more willing to take risks, and the dude became a sorcerer. I mean, you cannot go wrong with that. Everybody I knew back in the day was predicting that Will was gonna have powers, and lo and behold. And what I like about Will's usage of the powers in the big bad monster fight in the finale is that when he confronts Vecna in the hive mind, he doesn't immediately go for the kill. He doesn't immediately try and tear him apart. He tries to sympathize with him and sort of like actually try and bring him back to the light. Vecna was trying to bring those kids to the darkness, framing it as the light. Will was actually making somewhat of an attempt to bring Henry, I guess, back to the light. And that was beautiful. That is absolutely something Will would do. He would not just go in and immediately go for the kill shot. I mean, sure, he did go for something of a kill shot when Max and Holly were being chased in the mine prison, but he was more so trying to slow Vecna down than kill him. It was more about protecting Max than it was about defeating Vecna, and I think that's really what it comes down to as to why I liked Will so much. It wasn't about killing a guy who had killed so many people. It wasn't about slaying this ultimate evil. It was about protecting his friends and everything he held dear to him. That was his primary motive. Not killing a guy, but protecting the people he loves. And I really don't think there's anything I need to say about his coming out speech. I really don't think there's any notes I need to add to it. It was good. Maybe could have shortened the length a little bit by just a couple of minutes, but I don't care. It was a great scene. But on that note, I would like to discuss something that I have heard a couple of people, in some instances, it's complaining. In other instances, it's just a genuine pointing out of criticism. A lot of the dialogue exchanges in this season were quite long. On one hand, I can understand it. This is the final time we'll get to spend time with these characters, so we might as well spend a bunch of it with them. But on the other hand, I can also understand why people would want slightly shorter dialogue interactions. If there were less dialogue interactions and more intricacies in the conflict and more conflict in general, I think people generally, viewers generally respond better to more conflict and more tensions and more action and stuff like that. I think that's generally what the average viewer responds to. Of course, they respond to heartfelt moments with our characters too, but if they're, if they drag on for a little bit, or if they're just a little bit too long, or there's more of that than there is action and conflict, that can kind of be a turnoff for some people, and I understand that. As a self-taught writer myself, I don't claim to be any, I don't know, who's a famous writing guy? Asimov. I don't claim to be any Isaac Asimov, or, who's another great writer? Or George Orwell, I don't know. I don't claim to be any sort of George Orwell, but I've been a self-taught writer for, the last, 5-6 years. And I did realize with some of my stories that I've written, just, for practice and just because I wanted to write them, that wow, a lot of my characters just kind of stand around talking a whole bunch and not really doing much of anything. And when I reflected on those older parts of my works, I was like, okay, time to get some things moving along. I think I definitely would have shortened some of the dialogue interactions because some of them I would keep exactly the same. I think Will's coming out speech I would keep the same. I think that interaction between Will and Mike when they were going to the tunnels for the final crawl, I think I'd keep that the same. I think I'd keep every single conversation between Will and Robin exactly the same. I might shorten some of Vicky's and Robin's interactions a little bit. But, there's some interactions I would shorten and others that I wouldn't just because they carried so much weight. Like Mike and Holly's interaction in episode 1 when Holly was, outside the office and she was talking to herself and all that. I think that interaction was great because it really felt like Mike was genuinely trying to be a good older brother. And while I really liked the dialogue between Steve and Jonathan in the Abyss when they were, heading towards the center of the hive mind, I really liked that interaction a whole bunch. But I think I would probably shorten it a little bit. Leave a little bit more room for the big final boss fight, Still a great scene, though. We didn't really get too much interaction between those two characters really at all in the series, aside from fights or really awkward conversations. But, it was still a good scene. And another major criticism that I've seen brought up a lot, and this one was not surprising at all, the lack of character deaths. I think a lot of Stranger Things viewers are probably also overlapping with other fantasy shows or sci-fi shows, say, I don't know, like Star Wars. I bet there's a lot of Game of Thrones viewers who enjoy Stranger Things because, Game of Thrones viewers are big on having huge casts of characters and they probably responded well to that with Stranger Things. And just big other like Lord of the Rings. I'm sure a lot of people who watch Stranger Things also enjoy Lord of the Rings. And, I'm certain that a lot of them came to expect quite a few character deaths in the final season, considering how many characters there are now. I mean, my goodness, I probably couldn't even name them all. Also, I'm disappointed that there wasn't, this is gonna sound horrible, I'm disappointed that there weren't any character deaths because the Deadpool I did in my prior Stranger Things videos is now null and void. No one on that list died. Now, I'm not actually upset about no main characters dying. I myself am perfectly okay and content when watching something or reading something where all of the characters make it out on the other side alive. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're alive and well, because we see how much they struggle and how much weight they still have to carry for the rest of their lives. However, I do understand also that the promotional material for Stranger Things 5, mainly the trailers and the dialogue lines they decided to include in those trailers, accompanied with the shots that they overlaid with said dialogue lines, those trailers really implied that not everyone was gonna make it and that no one was particularly safe and anyone could die at any moment. So from that point of view, totally get it. I don't think there was any universe where Hopper could have been killed off after having been killed off in a prior season, so I did not expect him to die. Kali being brought back, Elle's sister, her being brought back and then killed, I don't really count her because Kali feels like more of a plot device and a character device to push Elle's story forward. I don't think any tears were wept for her, quite frankly. And Elle's death being a sort of a fake out, and it's like, oh yeah, it was only an illusion, and she's God knows where now. Looks like she was in Norway from the looks of the final shot. But even then, when Mike is telling the story, he's like, we'll never know. We can only believe in our hearts that that is what happened. I understand why people would be upset at the lack of character deaths, because, death is kind of like aside from taxes anyway, death is like the one thing all of us universally understand. It is the ultimate end. And when we see death occur to a character we've come to love and come to know, we are just utterly heartbroken. And then that sort of makes us even more invested, like, who else is gonna die? And like, will they even actually succeed or will they lose? Death is a game changer that rebirths the audience perspective. And I think that's what people were sort of expecting with this final season, was to have their whole perspective on absolutely everything totally flipped upside down. And sure, there were a lot of things that were revealed that definitely completely blew a lot of theories out of the water, like the Upside Down being a wormhole, the place Vecna went to in season 4 not actually being the Upside Down, but in fact being a whole other dimension, or the exotic matter, and all that stuff. But nothing quite changes, warps, and flips a perspective on its head than death. So to the people who expected death and were disappointed that there wasn't any, I totally hear ya. And the last thing I'd like to talk about involves the final conflict of the entire season, the final big battle against the Mind Flayer and Vecna. I saw quite a few people saying that that battle felt kind of short, and in a sense, I kind of agree. I definitely feel as though that battle could have gone on longer, and I also feel as though the amount of time spent with our characters in the aftermath was also pretty long. It was half the finale. Now, I am not against aftermaths, seeing like aftermaths of the conflict and stuff like that. I love that sort of thing. Absolutely love it. And I think it was absolutely necessary for Stranger Things, considering how many characters there were and how much they had all been through. However, I don't disagree that the battle against Vecna and the Mind Flayer probably could have been a little bit longer. Maybe, I don't know, the gang gets split up and they have to hide and maneuver around the caverns, or I don't know, maybe one of them gets pulled in and ends up inside with Elle and Vecna and has to join the fight, like Will. If Will got pulled in and the three of them had to go head to head, well, Elle and Will versus Vecna, that probably would have been pretty kick-ass. Because in a sense, they essentially pulled a Battle of Starcourt with the final battle. Rain fire from above while Elle does damage from within, except in the Battle of Starcourt, she wasn't doing that because she had her powers taken away, or else she would have. However, one thing I really did like about the final battle was the fact that Joyce Byers got to decapitate Henry. I think that was absolutely perfect. No one else in that entire, I was gonna say room, but it's the inside of a giant interdimensional creature. Nobody inside that thing could have the right any more so than Joyce Byers. She went through more hell than almost anybody. She was the one who had her child abducted. She was the one who almost lost her child in an alternate dimension. She was the one who watched her child get puppeteered by an interdimensional hive mind. She was the one who watched her child go just like writhe and scream on a bed as she tried to burn the hive mind out of her. She was the one who got choked by her own child as the hive mind used Will's body to try and kill her. And on and on and on it went. And yes, Will was doing a lot of suffering, but a mother watching their child suffer that much and almost watching them die on multiple occasions, my goodness. It was very satisfying watching Joyce Byers cut off her Vecna's head. That was perfect. I would not change that. That is one of the things I absolutely would not change. Now that I'm thinking about it, and one more note here, that I completely forgot about. One thing I would change, or at least explain, is that MacGuffin they used in Henry's cave that he didn't want to go into, where he killed his first man, and then he found that glowing rock that connected him to the Mind Flayer. Where did that come from? What is it? Clearly it's something that connects our world to the Abyss, but how the hell did it get here? How the hell did it give, well, I guess the Mind Flayer gave Henry his powers. That is the one thing that I would either change or explain. And who knows, if there's a follow-up series with Nancy that's been sort of talked about a little bit internally, if there's a follow-up series, maybe Nancy will uncover some government cover-up about how the hell that thing got here, what it is, etc. Like who knows, who knows? But I've always said this, and I will continue to say it until the day I die, if something in a main series of any kind of media, video games, TV shows, movies, whatever, if you have to watch other media, like, or read a book, you know, that goes alongside it, that has events that take place before it or after it, or whatever. If you have to read or indulge in external media from a mainline series to understand something in that mainline series, that's not good storytelling. I'm sorry, but it's not good storytelling. That's why Phase 4 Marvel made me wanna... But to sum up my thoughts on the Stranger Things finale and Stranger Things 5 in general, I liked it. I really did. It did feel very, very final, and, you know, I feel like a lot of finales don't feel too final or don't feel like that really is the end. This felt like it was the end, especially with the closing scene. That is something that really was the perfect bow to knot things off, where Mike goes upstairs and then he turns around and sees his little sister, who is now his age when all of everything begun in Stranger Things, and she's sitting down there with her friends, playing Dungeons and Dragons, bickering with each other, having the same arguments that Will, Lucas, Mike, and Dustin were all having. He looks back at them, he smiles, he goes upstairs and closes the door, and life just goes on. That was the perfect ending note, and I would not change that for anything. If I were to sort of place this season amongst like which ones are my favorite, as I've said, seasons 2 and 4 are, I'd say, are still tied for my favorite seasons. I think I'd put seasons 2 and 4 tied for first place. Then I would put probably season 1, then season 5, then season 3. Season 3 is my least favorite. So while it's toward the lower end of my ranking on the list, I think if I were to just place the ending, like just the ending on its own, I'd bump it up a little higher. Maybe like tied for second place with season 1. Actually, scrap all that. I'm gonna tie it with season 1 for second favorite anyway, because it really is hard to pick a favorite season. They all have their merits. Sure, some of them have weaker episodes than other. Season 3. But the whole show was enjoyable pretty much like 90% of the time from start to finish. And I cannot wait to sit down one day in like 20 years and rewatch the entire show with my own kid, should I ever have a kid. And whenever that day comes, well, I'll let you know if I'm still doing YouTube. But that is just my take on the Stranger Things finale. What is your take? Do you agree that the lack of character deaths was kind of dumb and more blood should have been shed? Do you think that the Upside Down actually being a wormhole is really cool, or do you think it's actually really stupid? Do you think Mr. Clark getting involved with everything was kind of just, I don't know, a bit silly, or do you think it made sense for him to be involved because he's a scientist? I don't know, but I do care, so let me know down in the comments what you thought about Stranger Things Season 5 and its grand finale. There's only so much I can talk about in a single video, and I've been recording for almost an hour now, which is kind of ridiculous. So if you want to talk about the finale with me more in person or on an actual, like, live feed, be sure to come check out our live streams. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to hit the like and sub button. I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. I'd like to start off this new year strong, and I know there's a lot of things happening later this month that I'm gonna have like content to make on and stuff like that, so be sure to stick around if you want to see some of that. And of course, if you really like the way we do things around here and you want to show me a little bit of extra support, definitely consider becoming a channel member. Not only do you get access to a whole bunch of exclusive rewards, but you also directly support me in the process and help keep this channel running. And I would really like it if this channel would run for another year. But that is gonna do it for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and yeah, have a good day, everyone.